Hi, Cara.
Hello, Vanessa.
So we had a wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Ken Ginsburg. He's our favorite adolescent medicine doctor. He's at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, known as CHOP to insiders, and a professor of pediatrics at University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. And when you hear Ken, it's like, you're just like, oh, okay. He's been at this for decades. He has like a wonderful confidence and calm, which is essentially what he's trying to get parents to do. So it feels like listening to this episode is sort of a training session on how we can apply his knowledge and ideas from the book that we talk about, Lighthouse Parenting, and his previous book, Congrats, You're Having a Teen, which is hilarious. It sounds like a title you would have come up with. And he's just like a lot of fun. We cover a lot of topics in this one.
I mean, I think he's a lot of fun because he's a pediatrician. I mean, let's be real. But he has a tremendous breadth of credibility that brings a lot of interesting color to this conversation. He's the founding director of the Center for Parent and Teen Communication. So he essentially spends his time in that role empowering parents with strategies and skill sets that look at family connection, which is, by the way, Vanessa, not super common for someone who is caring for patients in a clinical setting, especially adolescent patients who are so often attempting to establish their own individual identity and their independence, right? For him to have another foot squarely planted in family communication and building skill sets that scaffold the world of growing up for everyone involved, I mean, that's right up our alley. As you well know, Vanessa, and our listeners may or may not, this is what we do on Less Awkward. These are all the resources that we try to offer parents and schools. And Ken really lives and breathes this as well.
We'll link to a ton of his resources, many of which are free. And obviously, when you're looking for our resources, go to lessawkward.com for everything we do.
All the things, yes. All right, enjoy. Hi, Ken. We're so happy to have you here.
I'm really happy to be having this conversation. Thanks, Cara.
We know as pediatricians, we know as people who work with kids, we know that's the royal we, including Vanessa here. As people who care about kids, that's the super royal we, including everyone who's listening here. We all know that there's this long laundry list of titled parenting styles, right? This has become a popular thing. Started with helicopter parenting as sort of the first big brand that was in the early 2000s, snowplow parenting, tiger parenting, all of the things. You've come up with a description that, if I'm being honest, is the first one that doesn't drive me bananas.
Me too.
And it's called lighthouse parenting. And I wonder if you can start by explaining what it is. And I think then people will understand why Vanessa and I are actually drawn to it, as opposed to sort of tasting the bile in the back of our throats when we hear the phrase.
Thanks so much for the frankness and the transparency of that comment. And I am so happy, Vanessa and Cara, that you are not driven crazy by this title. And I'll tell you why you're not, because it's not an extreme. The problem with the parenting literature, the one where authors just come up with a cute name, is that they seem to be arguing with each other. You go from helicopter parenting and some people go, that wasn't good enough. I'm going to be a tiger. I'm going to be a snowplow. And then other people go, whoa, that makes no sense. We're going to be free range. We're going to be permissive, right? So you go back and forth and it's a pendulum. And we shouldn't parent based on refuting the last thing the last person said. Instead, we should parent based on common sense, on culture, and on what we know works because it's proven. Here's the good news. The good news, lighthouse parenting is nothing new. I gave you a name for what we know works. What we know works is balanced parenting, right? Balancing this, that your child knows that they're loved and that you care about their development and you're going to respond to their needs and watch them and keep them safe and prepare them to be good, moral human beings. Both. You need that balance. And this is proven by 60 years of research that this kind of balance creates young people who have better relationships with their parents, which is the most important thing to me. And perhaps because of that, less likely to use drugs, safer in the car. They're going to have sex later. They're less likely to be bullied, right? They're going to do better in school. We know this. They're going to more openly communicate with their parents. So we know this from science. And you could ask your great grandma, hey, what works? And she would have got, you got to love your kids, but you got to protect them, but don't control them, right? She would have told you that.
And Ken, what is it about a lighthouse that symbolizes that approach?
Vanessa, thank you so much. That was my next point. The other reason it doesn't freak you out is that it gives you this concept of comfort, right? A lighthouse guides, but it doesn't control. A lighthouse is always there. It's present. It's watchful, but it allows you to figure things out on yourself, right? So as you may know, and I know you do know because you have a book behind you, that this book even uses kind of a statement of commitment that really puts out this whole concept. And again, I give you a metaphor to teach you what works. I didn't make this up. But here's the thing. I choose to be a lighthouse parent, a stable force on the shoreline from which my child can measure themselves against. I'll send my signals in a way that are clearly communicated. I'll look down at the rocks and not let my kid crash against them. I'll look into the waves and trust that my child's going to learn to ride them, but I'm going to prepare them to do so. Here's the piece that matters to me most. As a person whose kids are now 29, that light will remain bright because I'll always be a place. I'll always send a signal that says, you can come back to me in times of distress. You can rely on my presence always. That's a lighthouse.
Yeah, I mean, Ken, one of the things that I appreciate about the metaphor, and you keep the metaphor throughout the book, right? You're consistently calling back to this metaphor, is that a lighthouse exists in complicated settings, right? In a setting where, the waves get high, the weather gets stormy, the fog rolls in. So it's not just that you are a steady presence, but you are a steady presence in a setting that gets very tumultuous. And I think that's so valuable for us who care about tweens and teens, who are parenting them and educating them, to feel like, oh, this is a metaphor that works in this setting. And yet, Ken, so many of us strive to be perfect, even when we know it's impossible, even when we know it's a fallacy. And you argue for, and you use a phrase that I really appreciated. You argue for striving for a family with real world complexity. And I love that phrase because it is both honest, right? What family isn't complex? But it's also realistic and human. Why is it so important that we make space for the real world complexity of our families? Why does it matter to our kids as they grow and develop?
So the metaphor of lighthouse parenting is that I choose to be a stable force on the shoreline. Stability doesn't come during the calm water times. Mm-hmm. The world is complex. Vanessa, what you just described is, I think I'd call it life. Right? Life is complicated. And this false notion of perfection really makes us feel inadequate as parents. It makes kids feel like they're never good enough. And more importantly, you don't go to perfect parents, right? The people who raise good humans are humans. People who show how you navigate life's waves, how you deal with complexity. That's what life looks like, right? We have, unfortunately, it's not, Vanessa, you use the term perfection. Perfection is deeply dangerous. I'm going to turn the volume down and tell you something else that's dangerous, is feeling like we have to be happy all the time. and raising children and judging our success by whether they're happy. I want my children to be happy, but I don't want them to think that, like, I give you a cookie, now you're happy, right? I want them to understand how to navigate life's complexity and to always look for a relationship. Because no matter how crazy the world is, if you got your relationship, you'll at least be stable and not alone.
It feels a little, today, it feels a little like, while that sure is the definition of perfection, there's this alt definition of perfection, which is when things are going really badly for my kid, they will dump it all on me. I am their person. And I think there's this funny undercurrent for parents of, if you can't have everything look, feel, and act perfect, at least if things aren't perfect, you've got this relationship with your kid where they're dumping on you, and that is in its own way perfect. And there's this weird circular logic to it. And I feel like what you do a good job of is sort of reject all of it, right? And just say that we don't need this, that this isn't the definition of the job we're doing, right? The job we're doing is not about how other people receive it, or it's about being the steady force for kids so that they can go out into the world. And, this, Vanessa and I preach this constantly, which is why this resonated with us. I'm wondering if you can walk us through a little bit more data or a couple of examples of reasons why, for the non-believer who's sitting here, like, give us some examples of why this style of parenting works out well for your kid.
Yeah, I'd like to return to a couple minutes to what you said. Cara, we don't really know each other, though we definitely are aligned in so many ways. But I don't like the fact that your children dump on you. I don't like the negativity of the word dump. But I can tell you that you are a good mother if your children bring things to you. So I'd like to start with a compliment. You want your children to come to you, not just to share their grades and their good times, but to come to you when they need you the most. That's when you want them to come to you. So you may perceive it as dumping sometimes, but I would actually say that if you are the repository of their stress, the person they come to you when they are down, then you're doing something right. And what you're doing, I'm guessing, is you are seeing them in their best life, even when they're not feeling good about themselves, because you will return to the person whose love is truly unconditional, right? You will return to that person, because when the world is terrible and we don't even necessarily believe in ourselves, the most protective force in the world is having the person who knows you best, the thing, all that's good and right about you, and all that makes you want to pull out your hair, choose to love you. That's point number one.
Can I counter that for 1 second, though, and say, I see your negative interpretation of the word dump, but I challenge you. Dump can be the highest form of compliment. It doesn't have to be a negative. It can just be authentic and unfiltered. And so I don't disagree with you, but I also think, at least in my life as a parent, in my life as a pediatrician, I take that sort of massive onslaught of information oftentimes in the way it is intended, which is not negative, which is highly positive, or is just net neutral. It's just like, here, open the back of the truck and here you go.
you and I could not agree more. Because many people hear the word dump as negative, I was responding to that, but I agree emphatically with you. And the compliments are going to keep rolling, Cara. Right? So a lot of what I teach in the universe, let alone in my books, is how to be the person who will be available when your kids need you the most. And so part of it is that your love is truly unconditional. The next piece is that you are authentically non-judgmental. And that includes not being their friend. Because if you're their friend, they live in fear of losing their friend. And if they're going to dump on you, it means that they know there's no way they're going to lose you. So, yay. Point number 3, despite the lies that we tell about adolescents, that they don't care about their parents and that they don't like adults or care what their parents think, furthest thing from the truth, they actually care about you so deeply. So what I know, Cara, is that in some way you have communicated to your children, I have the bandwidth for you. And if you share your problems with me, even if I'm busy in the moment, I will do what it takes to open up more bandwidth, including taking care of myself. And I bring you back to being a stable force on the shoreline.
Ken, we're going to unpack a bunch of the kind of assertions that you just made, but I want to start with the last one, which is the assumptions that people make about teens. The assumptions that teens don't care what we think, don't care what we have to say, aren't paying attention to us, aren't tuned in. And one of the things I love most about the book is that you are like, no, no, no. They care so much. They may not always show it to us, but they care so much. They're so attuned to how we react. They're so sensitive to how we feel that, in fact, they will make choices. They're afraid of upsetting us. They may keep things from us because they're worried about our reaction. We underestimate how much they notice and how much they take on board. We don't appreciate how much the adolescent brain is actually taking in and how much that's impacting their decisions. And I love that so much because what it does is it helps us reframe our role and our behavior as an opportunity, right? You talk about this age as an opportunity. And I love that so much. So knowing that even if they don't show it, they're tuned in. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was in the car with my 14-year-old the other day, and he's like at the end of the school year. And I'm just like, dude, let's just get there. Let's just get over the finish line, right? And we're going through the last few things he has to do. And he had like a final test and a final quiz. And we're sort of going through everything. And he starts to parrot back to me all of the sort of mantras I've been saying to him all year. And he's a wonderful mimic, painfully wonderful mimic, right? And I'm getting it all back. And we're in the car and he's just rolling one thing after that next. And I'm laughing and he's laughing. And I'm like, dude, I know you're making fun of me, but do you know what this tells me that you're able to say all these things? And he's like, that I'm actually listening to you. And I said, yes, that you're actually listening to me. And I love it so much. And I'm like, keep making fun of me because it just tells me that you're listening. So how do we flip, Ken? How do we turn this sort of cynicism and underestimation of teens into a kind of superpower in our role in guiding them and loving them?
I'm so glad you asked. And I love this one, right? So, the other book, Congrats, You're Having a Teen, which is the pair of Lighthouse Parenting. The whole book is not only about refuting the undermining narratives, it's about how to bring out the best in teenagers. It's about replacing these myths about adolescent. If we think that they don't care what we think and they're not listening, we're going to stop talking. That's a disaster. If we think that they are just natural risk takers and think they're invincible, that's not true. How can you say that and they're anxious in the same sentence, right? It makes no sense. They are thinking so hard, right? But if we think that they think they're invincible and they're risk takers, we're going to protect them from themselves instead of teaching them to develop. So we have to refute these myths. We have to speak the truth about adolescence, and we have to bring in what is actually happening. So what is happening is that they are emotionally brilliant, right? The adolescent brain suddenly, a little bit before you'll see body changes in puberty, you have brain puberty. And suddenly you have to become incredibly intuitive. Think about it. You have to judge people's intentions. People are beginning to see you as perhaps attractive, perhaps as challenging in terms of your body size growing. Remember that our brains, they were designed to survive thousands of years ago. So you have to become emotionally brilliant. You have to read people, read their intentions, have incredible intuition, but it's the first time you're doing it. So you don't have that experience that says, maybe they didn't mean that. Maybe I overread that. So it's the first time all the input's coming in and you overread. It's why if you look at your son and you go like this, they're like, why do you hate me? Right? Because they're absorbing everything.
Just for the listener, Ken did the thing where he cocked his head like my dog does, where he's like, huh? Okay, go on, Ken.
So this is so important to know that adolescents are emotionally brilliant. And the other thing to know, and the reason that they push us away is not because they hate us. It's because they love us so much it hurts. The thought of leaving our homes is sheer insanity, right? Why would you have these parents who take good care of you, who you can dump on and they're still going to love you and feed you and shelter you? Why would you leave this home? It's insanity. So you have brain puberty. You look at this nest, right? This warm, cozy, fluffy nest, and suddenly you realize, I'm going to need to fly. So you're going to need to go through a process. The first process, you're going to have to look at the nest. You're going to have to go, actually, it's a bit prickly. And you're going to look at those birds bringing you the worms and go, I don't need them. I could find my own worms. And you know what? They were embarrassing anyway. The way they breathe, everybody's looking. So you go through this process where you push your parent away, not because you don't love them, not because you don't need them, but because you do need them and you love them so much it hurts. And what this book is about, one final thought, what this book is about, every single section of Lighthouse Parenting prepares you for successful adolescence and prepares you for a lifelong relationship, because your child is not flying away when they are 18. You want to have a lifelong, wonderful interdependence with them. That's what Lighthouse Parenting is about.
I'm going to pull two threads from comments that you made over the past few moments. One of them being this amazing juxtaposition of, we say that they can't think consequentially for good reason. Their prefrontal cortex isn't myelinated, all the things that everyone knows. But also they are grappling with anxiety, which is very much about understanding consequences, right? So I'm going to hold that very, I think, very important statement on sort of in one place. Then I'm going to go back further in the conversation and talk about how, where you talked about how we don't want to be their friend. We shouldn't want to be their friend. It is not effective parenting to be their friend. And bringing these threads together, I'm going to quote a line from the book, which reads this: Lighthouse parenting is about expressing our love while also being clear about our expectations, right? So very much honoring both of those concepts. As you just said, this is preparation for a lifetime relationship, that will, in fairness, evolve into something that looks closer to a friendship as they grow up and truly individually, and their brains are fully developed and they have their feet planted on the ground and they have their own capacity to clothe and feed and shelter themselves and all the things. But I'd like to ask you about this line about how we can, as parents, how we can, and frankly, as trusted adults too, right? So you don't have to be a parent to be this person. How can you express your love while also being clear about expectations when you're in this middling moment in helping to raise a kid? What does it look like? What's a scenario that people can sink their teeth into to understand it a little bit better?
Let me make a couple points, and then I want you to revisit the scenario to make sure that I answer your question. So my kids are almost 30, and they are absolutely my best friends. So they used to be that size, right? And now they are, my size. Why is it that being a friend during childhood and adolescence is not good? It's because adolescence is about identity development. It's about saying, who am I? Am I normal? Do I fit in? And there are going to be people everywhere that tell you you're not normal, you don't fit in. And every parent has their child say something like, I wish you were just like my friends. They're so cool and they never judge me. But they do. They live in fear of being judged by their friends. And we have to be the ones who are better than friends. We are the lighthouses. We are the stable forces that are not going to go anywhere. Our love has to be unconditional. Point one. Point two is when we come up with a scenario, we have to build our children. We have to build their skill sets. We have to guide them, not control them. If you control them, the kids will push you away. If you guide them, they will want you in their life forever. Point three, children's brains are absolutely developing. Adolescents absolutely can be spoken to in a rational way. It is a mythology that they don't like. You can't talk to them rationally until their brains are done myelinating. It's a process, not an event. The question is, which part of the brain do you turn on? Do you turn on the emotional part of the brain by being emotional yourself? Or do you know how to guide a child to think, in which case you will activate the thinking part of the brain that they have? And as you know, that's highly developed in both books, Lighthouse Parenting and Congrats, You Have a Teen. So that's the background. Now let's go to a scenario. You give me a scenario, but I want the recipe book. I want your listeners to be hearing the recipe. He's guiding, not controlling, right? He is not being hyper emotional. He's being somewhat rational, and he's not judging, right? So with that recipe book, we could think about almost any scenario, and I'm going to need you to.
Okay, Vanessa's queen of scenarios. Vanessa, you go.
So your 14-year-old comes home and they ask to go to a gathering of kids, and you're not crazy about the group of kids they want to hang out with, and feels like maybe there's not going to be an adult there, and there might even be substances there, and you kind of set a firm line and say no, and your kid gets really upset and starts shouting at you and telling you that you don't let them have fun and that you're just like such a bummer and they hate you. And how do we react to that, Ken?
Well, let's move this up a level. So Vanessa, you are mean and you are a bummer. Let's start there. And now let's bring in what we know from Judith Smetana from the University of Rochester about what we are allowed to say to our children and what we're not. So in that scenario, you need to ask yourself, is this a safety issue or is this an issue of my personal preference? You are always supposed to not let your kid put their hand on the stove, not let them run the street, not get in a car with someone drunk. Always, 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 right? Now, it's about how you presented it. If you say to your son, I don't like your friends, I don't trust your friends, I'm not comfortable with this situation, your son is going to put that into the bucket of, she's trying to control me. Why is she getting into my personal business? Because you have no right in their personal business, and they will push you away. Again, Dr. Judith Smetana has researched this. If this is a valid safety issue, Vanessa, if this is really not a hunch, but you know that there will be no parents there, that there will be drugs there, you know that there might be drinking and driving there, then this is a safety issue. And if you frame it not as no, because if you frame it as no, the conversation in your son's head is, she hates my friends, she ruins my fun, she's mean. If you frame it as, I love you, my job is to protect you, this is an unsafe situation, and so I have to say no to protect you. What may come out of the kid's mouth is, you ruined my life, but inside their head, they're going to say, my mom loves me, my mom protects me. So it's in the framing, but it's also in the choice, Vanessa. Don't make stupid rules. Don't make rules that are controlling and that are about the personal life. But the scenario you gave me, that wasn't personal. That was safety. And I respect your choice.
Let me give one alternate twist on the scenario that is less about people and more about behavior. So let's take the same 14-year-old, but instead of going over to a friend's house, this kid is at home and they're gaming. They're gaming all the time. And when you try to get them off, it's a fight.
Yeah.
And let's say that school's going fine. Grades are fine. There's not an issue about falling behind in other parts of life on account of the behavior. There are no other flags going up, but this gaming is like endless. Now, it's neither, a safety issue in the way we've defined safety in the prior example, nor is it really a preference issue in terms of people. It's a preference issue in terms of a platform, and you could substitute in social media, you could substitute in any of the things that we didn't grow up having this degree of access to. Now what, Ken?
Yeah, so you made it too easy for me, Cara, by saying that the child is doing well in school and it's not affecting any other aspect of their life, right? That made it too easy, because once you said that, then my answer is you shouldn't be intervening. I need to check in on another area, which is I have to make sure they're sleeping, eating, and know how to talk to a human being. Like if they can go, Mom, I love you so much, or Sir, I'm the man for the job, then I'm not really seeing a problem here, right? But so I need to throw in sleep. Now, if you begin seeing a problem with school performance, with an inability to have relationships with other people or to have human communication, schools falling behind, then you set boundaries. The other point that I heard you say is all the time. Nothing should be all the time, because we want kids to go outside. We want kids to have human communication. We want kids to succeed in school. But like all things electronic that we're not used to, kids are getting something out of it. And gaming, for example, assuming that they're not seeing things that are hate-filled, right? But assuming that they are interacting socially with kids around the world with games that are not violent or don't minimize hatred or war or things like that, it's good human interaction as long as everything else is going well in their life. The bottom line is, Cara and Vanessa, pick your battles. If it's about safety, if it's about not fulfilling something you need to do, if it's about falling behind other areas of your life, then you intervene. Otherwise, you create boundaries that allow room for other things.
Ken, so often as parents of adolescents, we find ourselves asking our kids to do the same thing over and over with little effect or minimal effect, right? And there's a kind of a frustration that they're never going to get there, or that we're like invisible, or they're just ignoring us. And you have a phrase in the book that development is a miracle. And another author who we love, Doug Bolton, in his book Untethered, talks about how development is on our side.
Mhm.
And I think there's a sort of optimism and positivity in that. Can you talk about what you mean by that and how we have to put our faith in their development and have optimism about where they're headed?
Yeah, they're learning. We are the stable ground in which they can comfortably learn. And their brains will develop. They will have more experiences and they will become wiser and wiser. What I want as they're developing is to know that they are worthy of being loved, right? And if they know that they are worthy of being loved by the people who know them the most, they're going to be fine. And your relationship is going to be fine in the long run. So I say that with abundant confidence. Vanessa, you brought up another issue about being invisible. And sometimes you repeat yourself over and over again, and it's as if they aren't going to listen. I talk about discipline in the book, not as a bad thing, but as something that should be done every single day, all the time. Because discipline isn't about control. It's not about punishment. It is about guidance. I also care deeply that families are healthy and have open communication. Our children are trained by us. And if you are making a point over and over again, and nothing happens when the child is not listening to you, or let's say that something happens when you escalate because you don't escalate, darling, I'd love you to, darling, I'd love you to, darling, I'd love you to, darling, I'd love to. You better. If the you better comes on your fifth repeat, I can guarantee your child will make you repeat 5 times because they want as much attention as they can get from you. So have as few rules as possible, right? But guide them, right? Don't have dumb rules, but have rules that will prepare them for life. And know this, you are training your children how many times you have to repeat yourself. And then your relationship is about nagging.
Mm-hmm.
You're repeating yourself 5 times. They're getting as much attention. And then they go away and go, my mother's such a nag. I don't want that to happen. If you want something to happen, it has to happen, or don't ask.
So what does it sound like when it happens on the first time, when you're not ready to escalate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the first ask, but you want to ask with more clarity, less of this sort of, I like the phrasing, darling, will you, right? It's we all know that moment. What does it sound like to get the job done and create some clarity and just a little bit of like a firm boundary there?
Right. So the first thing is I want most of your relationship to be out of the realm of asks or discipline, right? Because you don't want your child to spend most of their relationship time with you bickering. So instead, most of your relationship time should be enjoying, sharing, being, walking, talking, right? So it shouldn't be bickering or asking. That is the best way to prevent. Then when there is an ask, and you're choosing to ask only what is important to you, then there needs to be a consequence sooner. But the consequence shouldn't feel like punishment. It should be directly related to what happened. So, darling, I need you to get ready. Darling, I need you to get ready. Darling, you're going to be late for soccer practice. Darling, you're not going to make soccer practice if we're not in the car in 10 minutes. Darling, I need you to be ready. You weren't ready? You missed soccer practice. It's got to be where the consequence is related to their action. It can't feel like punishment. They have to go, oh my God, I didn't listen, and therefore blank happened.
Right. And Ken, that requires us as the parents to be able to withstand the discomfort of knowing those consequences may occur. And that is something you write about. It's so hard as a parent to know that the natural consequence, so the kid misses soccer practice and then it means, maybe they're benched for the following game and then it means this and that. And the natural consequence often feels like oh, it's too much for me to bear as the parent, right? Like we have to get used to sitting in the discomfort of watching our kids deal with the natural consequences of their choices and behaviors. And I feel like in our generation, I mean, I always joke our parents like were smoking cigarettes and drinking tab and like left us to just go raise ourselves. And our generation of parents, were sort of like so involved. And so there's so much oversight. And it feels like this concept, lighthouse parenting, is somewhere in between. Mom, if you're listening to this episode, you did a wonderful job and I love you and you did it perfectly.
Oh, she's not listening.
Yeah, I know she's not listening because she can't figure out how to pull up podcasts on Apple Podcasts.
But let me create a soundbite for you to email. Mrs. Vanessa's last name. You did a wonderful job. You should be so proud of your daughter. All right,
yes,
go.
There. I'll send that to her, Ken. So I want to think about, as we think about balanced parenting and we think about natural consequences in our discomfort, we think about steady, calm presence and weathering their emotional ups and downs. We think about the importance of failure and imperfection. One of the things as parents we work so hard at is like praise, is positive reinforcement, right? Like we're always trying to like give them a boost and be really positive as part of this steady presence. And yet kids actually find it really annoying and they stop valuing our praise when we are praising them for everything. Can you talk about when praise and positive reinforcement actually has like real value and benefit and when it just like makes us sound like white noise?
Yeah. So it's more than white noise. It actually does tremendous harm. This is the work of mindset, the work of Carol Dweck. We understand how praise backfires. So I want to, Vanessa, start by saying the title of this book is Lighthouse Parenting, not Easy Parenting, right? People like
that
you
book
and
would have sold so much more. Ken.
Easy breezy parenting, Ken.
A marketer, I'm not. So the reason that people like us exist is not because parenting is easy, but because it's vitally important and really hard, right? And so this generation of kids, we raise them a bit like you're as special as a butterfly, as unique as a snowflake. Look at you, Tommy, coming down the sliding board. Look at you. You're so brilliant. We never tell them that gravity helped, right? And then we wonder why they are anxious. Because if you were always performing for someone and someone communicated you always had to be happy, you were always on display, and your success, even sliding down the sliding board, is a reflection of me, that makes people anxious. So what do we want to praise? The first thing is our love is unconditional. What we praise is the human being, who the human being really is. Notice all that is good and right, all of their character strengths, their sense of gratitude, their sense of fairness, their sense of justice, their compassion. Notice this, not every time they do something nice, but make no mistake that you see it in them, right? And then what we've learned from Carol Dweck, who is the mother of mindset, which I talk about in my books, but let's be clear. She did a heck of a lot of research that demonstrated that when you praise in the way that says, you are so blank, kids feel awful when they're not doing that. And they don't like, you are so good at math. Would you like to study social studies? Oh no, I are good at math, not social studies. It freezes you. So the kind of praise we give instead is you did blank, and therefore blank occurred. You give them a sense of power, a sense of control, and we notice when their actions, and it's when they stretched that they did better. And then one final point, and I see Cara wants to say something, but the one final point is this. You want your kid to fail while you're watching. You want them to learn how to get back up, to recover, and to do better next time. So the real praise I want you doing is growth. When you see growth, when you see that the child has stretched into new territory, fallen down, and figured out how to get back up. You want to praise that because bottom line, and you know what I'm about to say because you know it's a thing I harp on in the book. Preparation is protection, right? Hovering says, I don't trust you to figure this out. But guess what? If you hover when the kid is in your house, are you going to still be hovering when they're 40? Because I want them to learn life lessons now.
Cara always wants to say something. Okay, here I go. Carol Dweck is such a pioneer, and the amount of data that was collected was phenomenal. The argument around the importance of mindsets and growth mindset in particular, for those who have not read or listened or watched what she has contributed to this field, go now and do that. But I want to bring up one area, maybe we land on this area that is hard to frame in a growth mindset kind of way, which has to do with how someone looks and the pressure that kids feel, all kids, frankly, independent of their gender, to look a certain way. And sometimes that is accomplished by having done something. Sometimes the thing they do is worrying. Sometimes it's not. But often it's just a fact. It's just how they look. And this gets really complicated and messy in the world of parenting because we don't want to praise people for how they appear in the world. And yet our kids, I will say my 21-year-old just the other night, she's back from college and just the other night was talking to me about how she really appreciates that we never focused on physical appearance, but it has left her feeling very insecure because she doesn't know how she looks. And she feels like in our family, there's such a pattern of not focusing on that because that feels a little superficial that she can't go there and kind of ask that very typical, normal, common question. So maybe a good place to land is how do we straddle this, whether it's with appearance or anything else? How do we parent around that in a world that focuses on a lot of things that are not sort of what kids do or I don't want to use the word achievement oriented because that's not the right vibe, but you know where I'm going with this question, Ken.
Yeah, you've landed in a very difficult area. You know that I'm an adolescent doctor. So you know that I spend an enormous amount of time trying to heal people who are suffering to the extreme because they are trying to reshape their body one way or the other.
Yes.
So I know how severe this is. And because that was my professional life, I also overplayed the not talking about appearance with my children. You can say things like, you are the most beautiful child I could ever imagine having raised, where they know that you've got the parental bias. I think that that's a safe thing. But in general, we definitely don't talk about weight. We definitely don't talk about body shape. And instead, we talk about being healthy. We talk about being healthy. We talk about the way you present yourself, right? It is okay to teach kids or to guide young people how to dress for an interview, how to dress for success, how to dress so that people don't judge you. That's okay. But we speak the language of health and we understand this. You know, we can talk about self-esteem from now until midnight, and I could. But it's not the words you say that give your child self-esteem. I'm going to go back to what I've already said. The most protective thing in your child's life is that the person who knows them best, all the things that are good and right about them, and all the things that make you want to pull your hair out, chooses to love you. Why do we love? So people know they're worthy of being loved. Why do we listen? So people know they should be heard. Why do we protect? We protect so people know they should be safe, right? These are the things we do as parents, and we shouldn't over focus on appearance. But can you tell your daughter that you think she's beautiful and you see your eyes in her eyes? I think that's fine.
Ken, I want to close with something a sort of call to action in the book, which is to create a culture of forgiveness in our families. And Cara, it applies to your question, right? In a different direction in some ways, a kid forgiving a parent. Ken, you spend more time in the other direction, which is parents forgiving kids and being a sort of steady, loving presence, even when our kids do and say things that are just super disappointing or worse. How do we cultivate that in ourselves? How do we, particularly if we or our partners didn't grow up in households that had a culture of forgiveness, if we're sort of been trained or hardwired in other ways, what are some things we can say to ourselves to remind ourselves not to hold grudges, not to cold shoulder, not to give up on our kids when they mess up, because they will, sometimes in really big ways? How do you think about sort of the inner monologue in creating a culture of forgiveness?
I end all my books on forgiveness and drawing a child back in when they have strayed. But what we're really talking about is a deeply cultural concept for me, which is peace in the home, right? And especially when the world is chaotic, especially when there is divisiveness or hatred outside of the home, it is deeply important that we create a culture of compassion and forgiveness in the home, that we become very intentional about choosing to forgive. It doesn't mean you don't notice things, but I choose to make this home a safe place. I choose to make this home a place where we can all mess up and never worry about being rejected. I choose to be more forgiving. There's also a language of forgiveness. As you remember, the book has all of these charts in it. Say this, not that, because. There's a language to forgiveness. And I'll tell you what doesn't work, Vanessa, is I'm so sorry, right? I'm so sorry doesn't feel sincere. You need 3 levels to forgiveness. And by the way, it isn't just about forgiving your child. It is also about asking for forgiveness for all of us. We are all in this journey of parenting for the first time. We all mess up, including guys who write books on this, right? We all do. So I am sorry. 1, I am sorry because I know the harm that it did you. 2, and you state that harm. And moving forward, I intend to blank, right? It's a 3 parts to forgiveness. A sincere apology won't be believed if you don't say what you're apologizing for and the action that you choose to take next. That is how we create peace in our home. That is how we move forward. But I also say, if your child is 22, 24, 47, and you didn't do things right, this is a real opportunity to come back together with, I wish I had. I'm sorry I didn't. What matters to me now is that we repair our relationship because I love you and always have.
Thank you, Ken. We loved having you here. And I think I have a lot of apologizing to do when we get off this recording. I'm just kidding. My best skill as a parent, Ken, is owning my crap. That's my number one talent as a parent. This was wonderful. Thank you for the metaphor of lighthouse parenting. Thank you for all the thoughtfulness and the research and the experience that goes into giving this as a guide to parents and trusted adults. It's a beautiful way of framing a complicated and exciting time. And we really appreciate all your knowledge.
I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. I mean, we did a lot of heavy conversation and laughing. And that's what life looks like.
That's the goal.
That's what life with us looks like, Ken.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.